Durst the worst?
Durst the worst.
Durst the worst.
Durst the worst.
Durst the worst.
Oh, Durst the worst.
Durst is the worst.
Durst the worst.
Durst the worst.
Durst the worst?
Durst the worst.
Durst the worst.
Subscribescar.com/Durst the worst if you have a video request. But for now, I'm getting to one. Apparently, this is some podcast with some shitlibs complaining about people who don't want to be forcibly jabbed with something that they don't need that has a small chance of having adverse side effects. Go figure. In today's episode of the Annex Sociology podcast, we discuss the anti-vaccine movement with two outstanding experts on the topic. Jennifer A. Reich, University of Colorado, Denver, is the author of Calling the Shots, Why Parents Reject Vaccines. Richard Carpiano, University of California, Riverside, is a professor of public policy with a long research record of anti-vaccine movements. Ah, man, don't you just love being called anti-vax right out of the gate? Just for not wanting... This is what the straw man is, before we even start this. Before I even see how long I can get through this fucking thing. How long I can suffer through this fucking clip here. Not wanting to be forcibly jabbed is now anti-vax. Just for the record, apparently. That's what this entire podcast is preloaded with. So let's check it out. Okay. Piano intro.
This is the Annex, a sociology podcast. I'm Joseph Cohen from Queens
start.
College in the City University of New York. Today we're going to talk about the anti-vaccine movement with two terrific scholars who are well-known and well-respected experts on the topic. We have Richard Carpiano from the University of Riverside and Jennifer Reich from the University of Colorado at Denver. Anti-vax coming up next. Our discussion was recorded on December 8th,
All right, so this is gay and Jewish, like right off the bat. That's cool.
We are here with Richard Carpiano and Jennifer Reich, two well-known experts on the anti-vaccine movement, to talk about an issue that has just about blown my mind. I can't believe what I've seen over the past year, and I was just dying to know what the experts think. And we have two great ones. For those of you who don't know, our first guest is Jennifer Reich from the University of Colorado, Denver. Jennifer wrote the well-regarded book, Calling the Shots, Why Parents Reject Vaccines, with New York University Press. Welcome, Jennifer. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Richard Carpiano from the University of California, Riverside, whose publication list is so long that it made me feel bad looking at the webpage. So I had to avert my eyes. You might remember Richard came on 3 years ago to talk about the anti-vax movement in the Annex. And a lot has changed in the past 3 years, probably for both of you. First of all, let's start off with this. I know that we have substantive questions, but I've got to start off.
So first of all, I just wanted to jump in and already point out there's already an appeal to the experts, and there's already an appeal to the fact that they've both apparently written books or pamphlets within the university system. So apparently that's, to your average shitlib, that's all one needs to just take in everything that these assholes have to say passively without questioning anything. Not only like the diagnoses of what the problem is, but also solutions to the problem, and any sort of like demonization or pathologization of people who disagree with them. We just got to take it at face value, I guess.
What has the past couple of years been like for the two of you? Like, this has really been, when the moment has come for your research. This seems like your moment has come. What's been going on in the past, I guess, year for both of you? Jennifer, you want to start?
Yeah, it turns out that it takes 10 or 15 years to become an overnight success. But, more seriously, I started studying vaccines, not so much because I wanted to study vaccines as its own biomedical product, but I had just finished writing a book about the child welfare system and was really interested in the tension between the state and the family, and when state actors can tell you how to parent and what that means. And I really wanted to look at it in a way that didn't focus on the big institutions sociologists usually go to think about the state: welfare, criminology, immigration systems. I wanted to think about sort of daily life. And that brought me to vaccines. And I'll actually tell you, when I started studying this in 2007, not that many people thought it was an interesting topic. And I actually...
It sounded like she was saying that it's just a matter of not if the state is going to tell you how to parent, but when. It's like, or how, right? So she just used it as a given, you know, as a shitlib state actor. She just has a huge part in raising your kids. And it's going to be with woke lefty gender ideology and white male bad ideology and America bad ideology and take the vax, eat the soy, eat the bugs, live in your pod, etc., etc., etc.
I got one review that said something like, do we really care what white women do? And that would, you know, and I thought, okay, I'm going to finish this.
What?
I'll refer to it as my sophomore album, and then I'll move on to something more cheerful, like drug addiction or homelessness or something else. And then,
Wow.
it took me a long
Dig at
time to
white
really
women.
feel like I got the story right of how parents come to make decisions about vaccines. And I wrote Calling the Shots in 2016. And I was really preparing in 2019 to start thinking about a new book project and thinking about something different. And then I found myself, like everyone else, in spring 2020, suddenly watching every moment and trying to figure out
I'm not gonna
just
make it.
whether it would go well or badly, but how badly it could potentially go. And that really has become the last 2 years of my life.
I guess the answer was quite bad.
Well, you know, I mean, I'll say, like, starting in spring 2020, when the Trump administration announced Operation Warp Speed, I started panicking. Not just that a vaccine for COVID could go badly, but really that a vaccine handled badly could drag down consensus on all vaccines. And we were already seeing declining support for childhood vaccines. And so that sent me, I think, into a anxiety spiral that led me to spend most of the last year and a half writing op-eds and really just trying to weigh in and bring some sociology to the public conversation.
Conversations on this face. So she literally just said, like, Trump vaccine bad, Biden vaccine good. You know what I mean? Like, Republican vaccine bad, Democrat vaccine good. Trump vaccine bad, and this face for these conversations. It's not looking good. I'm not making it through this entire fucking 56-minute podcast. I can tell you that. If you want to watch this entire thing, you can. But I just wanted to highlight some cringe in terms of the forced vax movement. If they're going to call us anti-vax, that's not even accurate. Well, what is accurate is to call them forced vax or compulsory vax. You don't vax, you don't eat. You don't vax, you don't have a job. You don't have any meaningful participation in society. And they think that they're morally righteous in having this position, not monsters that they are. Like, listen to them. Like, oh my god, any spaces? We're that such good people. Look at us.
And maybe just beg people to get vaccines.
Maybe, but I also feel like vaccines and vaccine manufacturers and government agencies owe it to people to assure them that they're trustworthy. And I wasn't sure that any program called Operation Warp Speed, where the head of a pharmaceutical company was going to oversee the process, was really going to do a lot to renew faith in the vaccine science and distribution. So there was some, I think,
it's
good
called
questions
the wrong
to have,
thing, therefore
I'm
it's
a
wrong.
strong believer that people have the right to good
God.
answers when they have good questions.
That's a great point. I want to follow up on that in a moment, but first,
it's called Warp Speed, therefore it was wrong. Wow, if there are any shitlibs out there still hate listening or hate watching my program here, please reveal yourselves and explain yourselves. Like, what about this philosophy is compelling? Please enlighten me.
I want to introduce our second guest, Richard Carpiano, who 3 years ago gave me my first introduction to the world of anti-vax. And, you know, I went back and listened to that old episode, and it was back then it was a small niche of people who didn't want their kids to get MMR vaccines or like the whooping cough. But it felt at the time like it was, you know, one of those small scale social phenomenon that we find where we delve into a deep corner and we find a little group that teaches us something. And in the past couple of years, this small niche interest has blown up to take over.
He sounds like a child molester
or something along those lines. Richard, what has been happening to you in the past 3 years since we've spoken to you? Because I bet it's a lot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, dick. What's up?
Well, first off, thanks so much for having me. And it's just awesome to be here with Jennifer talking about these issues. Yeah, and 3 years is a long time. And unlike Jennifer, I got into it much more from a social or in a public health problem standpoint, with it being I'm a sociologist and public health scientist, sort of hybrid that I was trained.
Oh,
And
wow.
so when the Disneyland
We should
measles
listen to what this
outbreak
guy has to
occurred
say, dude.
a number of years ago, and then
He's
when
a sociologist.
that was something that grabbed my attention. Coincidentally, right when I was going into a sabbatical, so that became kind of like sort of new focal area with a little bit of inspiration from it.
What if we could just imprison all sociologists? Oh, man. I think I know what the outro song to this podcast is going to be.
Graduate student, and Jennifer's work has been just been so important for me. So it's great to be here with her. I do a lot of work around vaccine acceptance and hesitancy, but I've also been for people who might follow me online on social media, I do a lot of work following the anti-vaccine movement too, which I do less sort of scholarly work around. I do more sort of public engagement work around that. And years ago, that was
they defined
still kind of
anti-vax movement yet?
Fringe, but yet still problematic activist set, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
It would be a way to phrase it. And now we've seen that really with COVID, and I'm going to fully own it here. I really thought when COVID came about that I thought, well, at least, now this will be something that might suck a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the anti-vaccine movement. For so long, there was this argument of, well, we're such a privileged country that we've never really had to deal with an infectious disease pandemic. So vaccines are victims of their own success, as the cliche goes. And so now here's to be something that will remind everybody about just how dangerous they are, how much we really need vaccines, and they won't really have anything to go by. And, I'm going to own it. I really naively thought that. And here we are almost 2 years now later, and we see that it's morphed into this multifaceted beyond vaccines now to so many other things. And maybe these are things we can get into later with some of our discussion here. But that's essentially where I've seen things. And then the other thing is, it's also shifted our focus on work that Jennifer's done and so many other people. Prior to the pandemic, we were very focused on child vaccines because, that's really when you
like to mutilate children.
And so it was really about parents' decision making and things that very much tie in with Jennifer's book, for example, which is really terrific. I want to say to your listeners, and I really highly encourage that they should read it. But it's not that it wasn't.
You ever notice that with people of a certain tribal persuasion, you ever notice that it's really just about them being able to touch you, even though you don't want to? Like, you don't want them to touch you or be involved with you or be around you or, influence you or control you, but they are going to do it. And any resistance on your part is going to be put under a microscope just like this. They're going to do full podcasts like, oh, they don't want us to touch them. I've studied this and written a book about how the Goyim don't want us to cattle, don't want us to mutilate them. Interesting. And it's just so cold and surgical and creepy, and if you support this, get the fuck away from me. Again, if you support the dividers for the kids in school, like making the kids wear face diapers all day, compulsory 3rd, 4th, and 5th jab to have a job and therefore eat and therefore support, support a family and participate in society. If you're that creepazoid, if you basically can't hear no, right, and listen when someone says no, don't fucking touch me with your vaccines or your creepy snotty face diaper or your shitty CRT. If you can't listen to that, get the fuck away from me. Like, holy
an
fuck.
issue before that hesitancy.
These people don't get
and
it.
Anti-vaccine sentiment around all vaccines
Coens,
wasn't an issue. But now we see this
types.
much more of an issue as well, as now adults have to go and get something that's a lot different than just their annual flu shot.
Can we start off just with a basic insight to what's going on with people? I've been very surprised at how many people in my personal life who I never thought would have been against vaccines, when push came to shove, I found out they were very opposed to vaccines. And it left me scratching my head like, what's going on? How do people get to thinking this? I feel like it's an old technology whose merits have already been well established. Like, what's going on? They don't need
it.
People?
I mean, it's compulsory and they don't need it. And they've seen small instances where people have had shitty side effects to these vaccines, and your framing is disingenuous. I'll head you off with a pass. I mean, I'll just say right now, you're being disingenuous with your framing. Like I said, it's not anti-vax, it's anti-compulsory vax. And it's anti-vax that is not needed. I mean, it's that
I think there's a lot of things happening and around this that in many ways are unsurprising. So, what I find in my research that I think is equally applicable to how adults weigh vaccine decisions is that everyone really sees themselves as an expert on their own health, an expert on their own body, an expert on their children, and that they trust their own judgment
over
more
you,
than they
yes.
trust that of experts.
You're not an expert, you're
I'm
a dumb
pretty sympathetic
dyke.
to this perspective because what we've seen over the last several decades is public health has really become an industry of personal behavior modification rather than actually community solutions. And we saw.
Why not just, take personal behavior modification? So how about just like taking vitamins? Speaking of that, right? Like changing your diet, taking vitamins. But they immediately go to the vaccines because it's about control and dominance. And again, them being able to touch you when you just don't want them to. Them being able to be involved in your life in a significant way when you clearly don't want them to. This is already so fucking cringe. I don't know how much longer I could take of this, but we'll probably up to the 15 or 20 minute mark or so.
This with the jogging craze in the 70s. We can think about the many apps you can download to count your calories, count your steps, support meditation, improve sleep, track how much water you drink, right? The idea that you're a personal risk manager all the time creates this illusion that you can avoid disease if you work really hard at it.
No.
And it turns out that while you can lower the risk of certain conditions, you can't completely ameliorate risk by yourself because most disease is some combination of genetics, environment, and bad luck. And that's never more true than when it comes to infectious disease. That infectious disease is entirely beyond individual control. But that vocabulary of that kind of individualism and personal responsibility for health, or what sociologists have called healthism, is really powerful. And it's not.
Aren't you glad that we pay well, I mean, to whatever extent we pay sociologists, I don't know, or make people go in debt to get sociology degrees on other people's dimes, really, to come up with terms like healthism. Aren't you glad?
Unique to vaccines.
It's
everything we talk about. And it's underscored the wellness industry for a long time. Many different kinds of diets and food modification plans, right? We can think about this as just an overarching vocabulary. And when we get to vaccines, what we run into then is the idea that vaccines are given to healthy people to prevent a hypothetical. So it's not the same as being sick and needing medication to treat you. What you're doing is you are choosing something that presents minute risk of an adverse reaction against the possibility of becoming infected with a disease that could kill you, make you very sick, or in some cases do very little. And
no, most cases do very little, you lying twat. No, you're very unlikely to get COVID, right? And when you do get it, it's very unlikely to have any serious effects beyond just a flu from what we've seen, right? Most people have already had it, right? That's what I understand. But she's being alarmist and saying, she just implied that most people who get it die. That's what she just implied. This is the alarmist, insane, just dishonest crap that your average shitlib is imbibing into their skull on a daily basis. This is why they're histrionic twats who can't be reasoned with. They're going to lash out at you and destroy your city. I mean, they're going to touch you. That's the theme of this podcast here, this response video. Judeo-leftists are just gonna reach out and touch you. And if you don't like it, that's anti.
So what we see during COVID is sort of an acceleration of all those same forces that we saw before COVID, which is to say that each person feels like they're capable of doing their own risk-benefit analysis. They are absolutely inclined to overestimate the risk of a vaccine and underestimate the risk of infection. And what I found in my work with childhood vaccines and how parents talk about their decisions, but it applies throughout, we see this in COVID also, is that individuals who perceive themselves to be young, healthy, to have good nutrition, to take vitamins, to support their health in other ways, really believe that COVID will not be serious for them.
Yes.
Because they work so hard on their health and that they have.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally true. That is literally true. I mean, I don't know if there are any keyboard jockeys that want to set me straight on that and how that's somehow not common sense and just true. Feel free. You're going to look like a dumbass and you're going to get the pin of shame.
Have good underlying health. And the challenge with all of this, of course, is that even though there were early efforts to identify risk categories, which included age, body size, and underlying health conditions, each person is an N of one. And so knowing risk does not make you able to predict your individual circumstance. And yet what you're probably seeing with your friends and what many of us are seeing with our cousins on Facebook is that each person really sees themselves as best able to decide. And if you don't trust the vaccine because you don't believe it's entirely safe, You don't believe it's entirely necessary. You don't believe COVID
Right.
is as serious as reported, which is showing up in some opinion data.
Right.
Then the vaccine seems less important, particularly if you think you can control.
And especially if psychos like you are advocating for it, it seems less important, less necessary, and maybe even in some rare cases detrimental to my personal safety. Yes. That, you know, I'm not alarmist about that. I don't literally believe that if you take this vaccine you're going to die or whatever, but there have been, you know, remote cases where people have been fucked up in some small way or large way from this vaccine. And if it's compulsory and there's even a small chance of that happening, I'm not cool with that. And no, that does not make me an anti-vaxxer or a radical or an extremist. Or if it does, then maybe being an extremist is the rational way to be in this day and age, because we're living in extreme times. Boy, oh boy, this podcast sucks and is a bunch of cringe.
All the worst parts of infection virus.
Richard, anything to add?
Yeah, I want to add on to that. I mean, I think that's just dead on, but also this really gels very well with a very American ideal of individualism too, in a way, of how we think about healthism. And then tied with that is now we have a pandemic, and we're not
think about
used to
healthism,
thinking
y'all?
about infectious diseases and about how our behaviors impact other people. Yeah, sure, there's smoking and secondhand smoke, and there's a bit of that. But otherwise, on sort of a broad national or even North American, we certainly extend this to Canada too, this idea that our behaviors have some sort of impact upon others, and that we have to think about risks that we pose to other people, is really very much a foreign concept for a lot of us. I mean, we think
no,
about...
it's not. It is for you, because you're not talking about like, hey, fat people, stop being fat. You're not saying like, hey, for instance, the aforementioned smokers, stop smoking, right? You're gross and you're making the rest of us inhale your smoke and potentially incur mild, if not somewhat severe lung damage ourselves, right? You're trying to force a medically unnecessary medical procedure on children in particular, and you're trying to use guilt and gaslighting tactics that are very, very on people in order to meet that end. And it's really creepazoid. You know, it's not necessary, and in some, like I've said, in some small cases, it's harmful, and you're trying to force it on people, and you're creepy.
I mean, what are the major killers in the United States? It's heart disease, it's cancer. In most cases, those are not things that, I eat a cheeseburger, it's not going to affect your health, Joe, or yours, Jennifer. It's things like that. And so this idea that now I have...
Yeah, but you're gross and fat, and I have to look at you. I mean, I'm sure that there's some way. There's no one action that has no... you know what I mean? There's no action that one can take that isn't going to affect somebody else somewhere down the line. That's just the way things are, right? Being a fat fuck. I mean, if you sat and thought long enough, I bet you could find a whole mess of ways that affects other people.
To be thinking,
this dude's literally trying to say, like, he's wow, it's almost like he's responding to what I'm saying. Like, being fat and gross and smoking, like, he's not going to tell you to curtail that behavior. He's just going to tell you, yeah, take the vax.
About my behaviors and my activities, not just for my health, but can have impact for other people, I think is also very difficult for people to grasp from this idea of a very individualistic, again, view of health that we have in our country and our culture.
You know what that answer reminds me of is I know that when I studied personal finance, I was left with the impression that many people had difficulty dealing with probabilistic events. Like they had trouble processing the concept even. And so, for example, people were resistant to buy health insurance because they figure they just won't get sick, not understanding that just because you didn't get sick, it didn't happen. But it's also like, I could see how somebody would feel personal responsibility, but there has to be a leap from there to the doctors are lying. Scientists don't know anything. Like, how do we get from you're responsible for what?
No, it's the scientists that we're allowed to see on social media that don't get banned, basically, right? Because there's like a monetary stake, for the Zuckerbergs of the world to keep the like compulsory vax motherfuckers on there and the anti-that banned, obviously. I hate these people.
Watching
they
your
lie.
health to you know better than scientists. Where does that come from?
One of the things you start.
You think you know better than scientists? Me. No, there's scientists that disagree with you. You just don't see them because whatever shitty shitlib fucking rag you read or listen to. You probably listen to a podcast like this. They're not telling you about the fucking laundry list of doctors that tell you, like, no, dude, you're 20 or 30 something. You don't need to walk around the fucking fruit aisle at the grocery store with a face diaper. That's insane. You don't need to take like 5 boosters of this vaccine. Like, it's unnecessary, you know. But they're going to get banned from social media, and that's not taken into account. They're just saying, you know, these are anti-vaxxers who don't trust science, you know, individualistic. And no, I think they're looking out for what's best their families and them and their families, and that's the collective that they look out for. And you just view it differently through the lens of this like really impersonal state apparatus, this cold clanking machine. It's really gross and creepy and just, I don't know, anti-human.
As you said, you know, vaccines are old technologies. Why are we doing this? And I think that's worth pausing and taking apart a little bit. So one is that vaccines have existed in many technological forms for more than 100 years. And that is an old concept. But the science itself has shifted and changed over time. And that's not necessarily reassuring. The other thing is that you have to remember that most of the vaccines that individuals are encouraged to use, whether it's childhood vaccines or even a handful of adult vaccines that are now available, have for the most part been around for a while. And so when we think about polio vaccines, measles vaccines, rubella, you know, diphtheria, which no one's even seen in a long time, tetanus, we think about these vaccines, well, they've been around our entire lives for most of us. And that means that we accept that they've served a purpose, that they've been tried and true, and that although there's absolutely folks I've talked to in my work, and Rich has followed very closely, that will point to the fact that vaccines are never necessary, they don't work. I've talked to people who said that polio went away by itself and the vaccine just got credit for it. But barring that small number of people, most people see that there's a purpose to vaccines, but they don't treat every vaccine as equally important. And so in my work, I hear people take sort of a cafeteria
training
approach.
people to talk like this?
Like, I think polio's serious, don't care about chickenpox vaccines. Because I remember having chickenpox as a child and it wasn't that bad. Or if I have a girl, measles is important because she could become pregnant, but I don't care about mumps for a girl, but mumps for a boy could be important because it could cause sterility in adolescence. Like, hearing people parse out that risk benefit links us to that individual question. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, is that vaccines are not all one thing. They don't work in the same way. And
Right.
the COVID vaccine, one of the things that's been...
Right, so to call people anti-vax is insane, right? The COVID vaccine may just not be necessary for me. It may just not be right for me. Yet, if I want to travel, in some cases, don't I have to have it? Also, the masks may not be right for me. And they're right for nobody, by the way. But yet, if I want to fly, I think I have to wear them, right? It's fucking stupid.
Really hard is that we really are learning as we go. And information changes often as new information becomes available. It's worth acknowledging that new scientific insight is very expensive.
So that's them explaining away like why none of this COVID shit has made sense, why every other thing that Fauci has told you has been contradictory, right? If you're vaxxed, you need to wear a mask. If you're vaxxed, you don't need to wear a mask. If you're unvaxxed, you need to wear, you know what I mean? Like that whole dance that they were doing. Like, at first, Fauci was saying that it was no big deal. You don't need to wear a fucking mask, right? Just go live your life. But then all of a sudden, you know, after that, it was like alarmism. Wear your mask. Take like 5 vaxes. It was just flip-flopping. And people who can't notice just that and show a fair bit of skepticism, again, it's fucking dead to me. You're crazy. Like, you're dangerous. Like, I mean, people that are such drones, like, they go along with things like BLM and feminism and Antifa and the trans agenda and the the COVID vax agenda and the mask shit. Like, if you go along with all that, I just can't help but think that you are some sort of, I don't know, infectious disease to me,
you know,
like a
it's
social
a lot
disease.
Of human suffering in human lives for us to learn about best, practices for treating the disease.
Can't listen
and
to these
what
people.
Things work and what don't. And that gives people pause. Like, newness makes people nervous. I think the mRNA platform, which is
Liars
a new
make me
platform to be
nervous.
used in this capacity.
Up-talking, vocal frying, just hipstery, sheltered kind of, I don't know, people who are just constantly lying. constantly signaling to other people that they're doing the right thing through just lying all the time, I guess. I guess that's their... those kind of people make me fucking nervous, like I said. Not newness.
It's been used in other smaller scale ways. Made people nervous.
The newness of so many people like this, not only coming to the fore and existing, but assuming leadership roles and positions of influence and power, like that is a cause for concern and neurosis for sure. Cause for alarm. It used to be that a chick like this would be some train hopper, like begging for change on the side of the fucking street. Now she's university level, author doing podcasts. I mean,
and
like people at the university level give a shit about her so-called work. It's just
backdrop to all of this, and Rich will be able to talk about this, I think, exceedingly well, is that if you're thinking about what would encourage people to really trust the technology and trust the safety, we have to acknowledge that we've made this decision culturally that vaccines will be developed, tested, and manufactured by for-profit pharmaceutical companies.
Okay.
And I have found myself in the very awkward situation prior to COVID talking about my research and finding myself in the place where parents might be mad at me and pharmaceutical companies really like me. And as a sociologist who can see a lot of the flaws of pharmaceutical companies and the ways that they have not proven themselves trustworthy historically, that's a really strange place to find myself in.
There you go. I mean, a shred of self-awareness from the shitlib, right? You're, oh yeah, rah, 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 anti-capitalism, blah, 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 pro-workers' rights, big pharma bad. Last year, or whatever, like 2-3 years ago, but now all of a sudden it's trendy on social media to blast off that you've taken Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. Oh, you haven't taken these? You're a bad person. Get away from me. You shouldn't be allowed to, there's something wrong with you. You're a conspiracy nut. You shouldn't be allowed to participate in polite society, etc., etc. We need to do an hour-long podcast breaking down your pathology and what makes you tick and everything, and we're getting everything wrong, and it's just...
But that is, in fact, the way we've done public health in the U.S. is we've doubled down on for-profit companies. And, if we go back to Operation Warp Speed, the ill-fated name...
Oh, okay. So she's blaming Trump for the fact... She's about to blame Trump for the fact that she was anti-Big Pharma like a couple of years ago, but now pro-Big Pharma. Now it's okay to be pro-Big Pharma.
Operation Warp Speed. What that really was an effort to take taxpayer dollars and give it to for-profit pharmaceutical companies to encourage them to do science better and faster. And you have to believe then that the government, the state, right, the FDA, the CDC are rigorously monitoring that process, even as they're financially invested in it. And I think that there's a reason to take stock of that and see how much we believe that was handled well. And unsurprisingly, there's a huge partisan divide, both at the early days under the Trump administration and the later days under the Biden administration about people's beliefs about those processes.
So once again, Trump vaccine bad, Biden vaccine good. This bitch is paid the big bucks for this. I can't stand it. I mean, you want to know why... I think I've talked in other videos about how there's no positive incentive structure in the society. We're incentivized to act like these people. If you want to be successful, you know what I mean? Like, you gotta act like these fucking bug people, these fucking pod people. I don't know, these clickety clacking, just disgusting. I don't. Oh man.
Look at that, Richard.
That's why the world's so
say,
fucked.
to add a further example to that of where we really see the problems with this is think in the early days of the vaccine and its development and its rollout. We would see early morning news.
1.0.
A Pfizer representative appearing on business shows or on CNBC. And it was always coincidentally right around the time that markets were opening up. And those things do nothing to instill any sort of public confidence and really just double down on these sorts of existing concerns and distrust that people have of big pharma. And with that then comes also the concerns around conflicts of interest or collusion with big medicine.
Right. And so they know, dude, that this is their revelatory moment. Like, they're revealing that they're in bed with big pharma and they're just having an optics discussion, right? Like, how do we to Joe Six-Pack Normie, how do we adjust our optics such that he will perceive us as not being in bed with big pharma like we are? That's
and then in this
essentially what
case,
this
big
is.
government. And so
Yeah,
so you
big
have these
government, big
vast sorts of
pharma, big
institutions
tech.
that are very mysterious and really, in terms of transparency, very difficult for the average person to grasp. And certainly then it becomes very easy for this kind of mistrust to be sowed.
Operation Warp Speed was kind of
Well,
interesting too,
legitimately.
because it showed that you can develop all the technology you want, but having the uptake, having people actually buy into the
Yeah,
technology,
okay,
and go
technology
along with it is
understander.
really, really important.
Glad
It's
you logged
interesting.
on there.
We developed the vaccine,
Idiot.
and then we fell behind other countries that hadn't done it. We basically got a head start. It's quite tragic.
And other countries didn't do anything with COVID, and they're doing fine. Also, other regions that are comparable in size to said countries. It's just, fuck you.
It
You're
really
stupid.
fits in, I think,
You're a
Joe,
liar
in many
and a
ways
charlatan and a
into
shill.
a general belief that technology will always save us. What's Silicon Valley doing these days? What's the latest TED Talk kind of hype that we, and so in many respects, the Operation Warp Speed, in terms of that science and engineering innovation sort of focus, really, I think, highlights that. There wasn't really any.
Yeah.
There was very little sort of focus on education, sort of getting ahead of messaging, thinking about public communication with it. It was just this idea of.
So just bringing up Operation Warp Speed during the Trump administration, even though Trump is nowhere to be found, obviously, Biden's here. This is the shitlibs' way of sort of massaging the shitlibs' brain, like easing them into accepting that they just like wasted the past 2 years of their life with this bullshit. Like it's to explain their cognitive dissonance away, so that they could sort of process why, oh wait, none of this has made sense. It's all kind of like seeming like a scam and a waste of time now. It's like that's what they're doing.
If we build it, they will come. To pardon the.
They're just blaming Operation
And
Warp Speed
that was all that
for
was
none
really
of it making
needed.
sense
And,
this past
and
2
we,
years.
we learned that it is a very different thing to develop new technology in a lab versus disseminating it, whether it be public acceptance to just logistics and manufacturing and and rollout and accessibility.
One of the things that's really important to note, I think, in all of this is if you look at the diagrams and the organizational charts from Operation Warp Speed, there was this moment where it's like a picture of a factory, and it's like the factories will develop it. And then there was an airport with FedEx exclusive contract, and then that's it. And people in public health were watching this saying like, well, how are you getting it from the airport to people's arms? How is that happening? And that was never in the drawing. It was never in the schema. And it was really never in the imagination of what needed to happen. The other thing that's really interesting is that
happen in these I can't listen to any more of this. It's just gobbledygook. They really will not stop until every last child is poked and indoctrinated and masked, muzzled, put in a plastic divider. The world is so insane. How did our parents and grandparents allow these people to take control? Because a lot of our parents and grandparents are these people. Let's be realistic. That's the other sickening part. But anyway, subscribestar.com/DirtsTheWorst. If you got a video request, I will accommodate you. And I will send you the new holographic stickers. And I'll play you out with a tune that I recorded recently. But peace out.